Congressman Jim Clyburn is the Assistant Democratic Leader, and he joins me now. Congressman Clyburn, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Always a pleasure. I want to start with Harry Reid's prediction there on the House, and it's what a lot of us that follow this very closely, we all seem to believe the same thing, that the votes just aren't there in the House. But it seemed that Harry Reid was signaling, hey, if the House doesn't do it, don't make us do it and have legislation out there, tough votes for rural Democratic members say. What do you say to Harry Reid?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct. The fact of the matter is we kind of go through that process pretty often when we think that something is going to have tough sledding in the House. We ask the Senate to go first, but in this instance, it seemed as if that may be a tough vote for a few people. I saw Senator Manchin of West Virginia this morning, and I heard some of his comments from on yesterday, and I think it signals that it's going to be a tough sledding. However, I do believe that we have to do something, and that something to me should be background checks ought to be universal. I think we ought to get rid of these 30, 40, however number of clips that are being used. I believe if you got the weapon and don't have the clips, then you've gotten a pretty big deal out of all of this. So I'm all for background checks. I'm all for getting rid of these multi-round clips.
But let's be realistic. What House focus on dealing with gun legislation while there is still going to be this big debate, big argument over what's coming up in March, funding the government and raising the debt ceiling?
Oh, sure. Yes, we can. I'm not too sure.
I understand, but do you think that's going to happen? Yeah.
No, I don't. I do believe that the House will postpone any consideration of anything resembling gun control until such time as the Senate acts. And I think the House is going to focus all of its attention on the debt ceiling and sequestration.
Let me ask you about that. The White House says they're not negotiating on debt ceiling. It's a non-negotiable item. And yet Senate Democrats have written a letter basically begging the president to come up with a plan B. If the House Republicans saying they're not going to raise the debt ceiling without, they're going to use it as leverage and they want to do these with different spending cuts and the president says no, then the president needs to come up with a plan B. Do you think the president needs a plan B?
Well, plan B to me is the executive order. And I know what the White House has said about that. You may recall.
You mean when you say executive order, do you mean the 14th Amendment option?
Invoking the 14th Amendment as a remedy. I've been here for 2 years now. I've been saying this ever since we had the last debate, and I think that's what the Senate is saying in their letter. And, of course, I am co-signer of a letter along with 22 other House members a week and a half ago asking the President to use the executive order invoking the 14th Amendment. I believe that the executive order was good enough for Emancipation Proclamation, good enough to integrate the armed services, and many, many other things that we seem to take for granted as if it passed the Congress. None of those passed the Congress. And if the President, as the Chief Executive Officer of the country, is faced with this kind of recalcitrance on the part of a few members in the House of Representatives, I think he would do well for himself and for the country to sign an executive order invoking the 14th Amendment.
Well, it's a question the president, we just learned, is going to be holding his last press conference of his first term. That's going to take place at 11:15 this morning. I imagine that and a few other questions will be on the table there. Let me ask you quickly about sequester, the automatic spending cuts that got delayed. They're both spending cuts on the domestic side, plus for defense. I know you have been an advocate of avoiding this sequester at all costs.
Right.
Do you think it can still get avoided, or do you assume it's going to be implemented?
Well, I think it will get avoided. I really do not believe that we're going to go through sequestration. I think that if we can really engage the American people in dialogue on this subject so people will know exactly what it is that we're talking about. We're talking about a dramatic cut in veterans benefits, in other benefits that have been promised the American people. We're talking about across the board cuts, a meat-axe approach. I think that we ought to sit down, use the scapula, and really go through the budget and see where it is that we can cut, and differentiate between defense and the military. Those things are two different things.
Hang on.
And
when you say differentiate defense, when you say differentiate between the defense and the military, do you mean defense contracts versus military what? Explain that difference.
Well, taking care of our men and women in uniform, taking care of the infrastructure that needs to be made on these military installations. I live within the shadows of Fort Jackson. My hometown, Sumter Shaw Air Force Base, and the 3rd Army are located. We have transitioned to these dual facilities, and we are still in that transition mode. So there are a lot of infrastructure items that need to be taken care of, which I do not think we ought to mess with at all. But when it comes to a lot of these exotic defense programs that may or may not work, we've spent billions and billions of dollars looking at new weapon systems when I do not believe we need to go there at all. Those things should be put off until the country is in much better shape.
All right. Jim Clyburn, the House Democrat, one of the House Democratic leaders from South Carolina. Thanks for joining me this morning. We got through a lot of stuff. I appreciate it.
Thank you.